and welcome once again to Space Talks by the America's Future series. On this episode, we welcome uh, former NASA Director Stephen Schmidt, who has degrees in mechanical aerospace engineering as well as in public administration. He has worked both in private industry and in government, one of those rare people who understands both sides of that coin and knows the pros and cons of both. And his career has been illustrious. Worked in strategy, worked in operations, helped stand up facilities. We'll touch on one amusing point where he worked at a facility, helped build it, and then helped reinvent it almost 25 or perhaps 30 years later, and finished his career helping define the strategy to move forward at NASA Ames. Welcome, Director Schmidt. Thank you so much for joining us. It's really a pleasure to have you.
Well, thank you very much, Zaheer. I appreciate it. I'm excited to be here, and this is looking forward to this. It's going to be fun.
Definitely. So, sir, I would love to, before we get into some of the topics we have today, I'd love to for you to just share with our audience a little bit about your path to space. Where you came from and kind of how you got there. A little bit in a nutshell, if you don't mind.
Sure. Like I say, I did get my degree from Fresno State in mechanical engineering, and my first job was with DoD at Edwards Air Force Base. So that's where I began my career, and I became a flight test engineer and crew member on a lot of different test aircraft that we had over there, including B-1s and B-52s and F-4s, etc. And then after my time there, I went to work for Rockwell International, building Discovery on the space shuttle, and then moved over to the B-1 program. And during that time on the B-1, I was in also a flight test engineer on full-scale development of the program to develop it for the warfighter. Then after about 12 years working with Rockwell, I moved on to NASA. And I was lucky enough at that point to be a project manager on the SR-71 program. And just kind of one of the things I brought up when I was a kid, it was just one of those fascinating airplanes, so being able to work on it was great. But I'd worked on F-15 and various X airplanes, X-31, X-43, and X-44, et cetera. But then I got into strategic planning for the center, Armstrong Flight Research Center at Dryden at the time. And then I was asked to go to headquarters and be a special assistant to the NASA administrator, Sean O'Keefe, back in the early 2000s. During that time, I was assigned to the Columbia Acts Investigation Board.
Right.
Also the President's Commission on the implementation of the United States space exploration policy. Worked on an orbital space plane, worked with them on the International Space Station's heads of agencies, working with Russians and the Canadians and Japanese, NISA, and the people involved with that. When I completed that, I went back to Armstrong, Dryden at the time, as a deputy center director. And then during that time, I was asked to stand up, what you mentioned briefly was standing up at the time it was called the Dryden Aircraft Operations Facility, which was the assembly building for the B-1 bomber at the time. So it was one of those things, I was there at the beginning, and it's one of those things where you never think you're going to go back, and you wind up going back. And so, but it was a fun time though. And then I was the director of safety and mission assurance, and then the associate center director for strategic implementation. And I finished up my career up at Ames. But when you say how did you get there? Well, I remember when I was in a grade school, I had this huge interest in being an astronomer. That's what I thought I was always going to be, with astronomy. But whoever thinks of what you're going to do, I want to be a fireman, and however it comes out. Who thinks that you're going to progress into those areas? But but I think part of that was growing up near Edwards. When I was a kid, I was exposed to the early era of jet testing at that time, and my parents both worked at Edwards at that time also. So again, I always had that fascination in those amazing men and their flying machines. And I remember being the SR-71 in 1964 out at Edwards Air Force Base. So who would have thunk, right? But I always wanted to be a test pilot, so I joined ROTC, and that unfortunately didn't work out, but I still got to fly. And I also applied to be an astronaut back in the early 80s to be on the shuttle. Didn't make the cut there either. So,
But I mean, they gave you clearly a nice office to fly, and you flew it pretty far. I mean, it's quite an amazing variety of different things. So you understand the complex. You understand the American, basically the American initiatives and activities around space really well.
mm-hmm.
And I think you know, as part of that, you know, we're at a really interesting moment now, and you were part of it, creating it back in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, when the government first started saying to industry that we really need you to jump in here and really start doing things. And some of that, you know, things like the Space Act, et cetera, have to some extent, to some significant extent, led to SpaceX, Blue Origin, and Rocket Lab, and the success of those companies. You know, they're standing on the shoulders of giant rocket builders at NASA. So from this moment, looking forward, what do you think is critical for us to learn from the past and then apply forward and move forward as a nation? You know, perhaps from a national NASA type strategy, but also an integration of commercial companies with NASA strategy.
Well, yeah, that's a very good question. It is very complex and it's multifaceted, so there's really no direct one answer that's going to satisfy all of that. But you know, when we began all this in 1950s, you know, that's when that conversion from the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics went to NASA, and the Space Act was developed in 1958. But even though there's been 60 years of access to space, it's still in its infancy stages. Again, the time that we've spent is measured in minutes in the transition going, you know, out of this planet to another planet back. And unlike the airline travel, which is measured in hundreds of thousands of hours, so we've got a lot of that. But I think there are, from my perspective, there are three stages of space development in this. So you kind of think of them as a training ground, you know, and an industrial park and a settlement, and they really can't be reshuffled or skipped over, but we have the control in which the rate that we move from one stage to the other, depending on how much persistent and commitment that we have in the level of our investment. So, you know, I think the short to medium term goal should seek developing the enduring infrastructure that we have. And it's the skill sets and the experience that'll be essential. That's what we need to develop, is for living and working, establishing communities that create the value in the inner solar system. So this is a brand new type of business that we're getting into, if I will use the analogy of Henry Ford, you know, with the car, when everybody was horse and buggy, and now you got this new thing coming up, and look what it's developed and evolved to over the years.
Right.
But the goals and the capabilities should not be defined as destinations that are essential for creating the spacefaring society that we're looking at and expanding the knowledge and the economy and the sustainability, you know, to develop these technologies and processes. But you know, you know, none of these goals that I mentioned specify a specific planetary destination.
Right. So that's a really important, that's like super key. I just want to pause for a moment and make sure our audience catches that, right? We're talking about not being destination focused, but being skill and infrastructure focused to create a seafaring civilization. That is a fundamental concept that perhaps I don't hear about enough. People talk about, let's go to the moon, let's go to Mars. And then as a corollary, they talk about what that's going to get us, rather than saying, what do we need? And the moon and Mars are measuring sticks for whether or not we have what we need.
Exactly.
That's really interesting, sir.
Yeah, it was a friend of mine, Paul Sputis, who unfortunately passed a few years ago, was a very strong advocate of going back to the moon. And I personally had to agree with him because, we went to the moon back in the 60s, early 70s, but the people that are around and the expertise being able to do that is gone. So we've, in a way, forgotten a lot of that stuff on how to do it. So, it's better to travel a week to and fro the moon and develop infrastructure and living quarters and sustain some long measure of human presence there to understand what we don't know than to go someplace that's a year to a year and a half going to Mars at some other planet, very, very hostile environment, and trying to get there and sustain with the current technology that we have right now. Rocket engines in their form are pretty much at their peak performance. So there needs to be a new propulsion system developed. And I did read one about a development of another propulsion system being nuclear, but it would reduce the time to Mars like to 3 months. I think that's a great start. It's looking at another way of being able to do it, but I think we're still leaps and bounds away from that. That it should be a matter of days, not months. And again, we need to go back to a place that's close so we can understand what it is we don't know yet.
Right, and do it again and again. Become proficient, perhaps.
Yeah, it's the progress toward the goals, and and the rate of technological advance, and the lessons of experience, and the availability of the resources from everybody involved are what are going to make those destinations and goals and objectives come true. It's not something, and I agree with you that we shouldn't plan on a destination, figure out what we need to get there. We need to develop these various other types of activities and then determine whether or not that will then decide where we need to go or where we should go or where we can go.
Right.
Not point at that and then try to make it happen.
It's interesting, one thing that, I've been eager to ask you, and we're starting to touch on it, is as an executive, having been an executive civil servant, an executive, in the space industry, in this very fundamental R&D, risk management, paradigm. It sounds like there's some specific advice you can provide to those who are in that place now, or and even possibly things that you would do if you were in these leadership roles right now, such as the space enabling infrastructure initiative you suggested. Could you perhaps elaborate on maybe like the top 2 or 3 things you would recommend executives do, or that you would do in their place?
Yeah, when I was working there, looking back, I really had a great career. I was able to do a lot of things a lot of people were not able to. And, so I was fortunate to be a part of an amazing agency that was a lot bigger than me. And I was just a small cog in that bigger wheel. But the time I was there, I did put my heart and soul into attempting to make things better when I left than when I came in. So it was a matter of passion and pride and wanting to do things for the bigger objective and larger good. But I think that the great leaders in this, doesn't matter if you're in the government or you're in industry, but they need to make sure that they're heard and understand. But they also know that what's very critical is they also know the importance of listening. Just because you're in that position doesn't mean you know everything. So communication is a two-way street, and making the most of it really helps an organization move forward instead of hitting the brakes. Go a little bit forward, hit the brakes, go a little forward. You bring in the people who actually do all this stuff. So it's having that ability, that agility to learn. That natural curiosity that you need. and to be able to focus on attention. So you have some mediation that goes on there. And you also need lateral thinking that invites the creativity, the innovation, and fresh thinking. So that's what's always good to have about new blood with people to bring in things. And, you know, you need advanced collaboration. So you need that radical independence that really is important in there. And then a big part that is hard to capture, and it's hard to get because I don't really see where we teach a lot of that, but it's the systems thinking, because everything is a system of systems. So one piece of that can make another piece work or not work. But if you have one person that all they do is see that piece they work on, they don't know how the rest of it comes together. So it's an understanding of that this whole complex system that's multifaceted is a system of systems. It's not a particular thing that happens, just like it would with an incident that occurs. It's not one thing, it's a bunch of things that fall.
Right, it's the cascade in that system. So that you know, you touch on some really amazing ideas. And it's also amazing to think that how much of what you just gave us is intangibles. It's not as much on the technical side, but it's in the leadership side.
Exactly, because some of that stuff you can't. Well, you know, unfortunately, a lot of it's not taught. Some of it is learned, and so I've had some. I've been fortunate enough to have some very experienced and knowledgeable mentors in my my career. And from them, I've also had not so good ones. And from there, I did learn from those, though, because I learned what not to do and not how to do something. And the other ones, I said, that's what it should be. That's how it is. And that's what I want to emulate. So I've had some good, so it's helped. So both sides of the fence have helped and in that area. But, you know, as far as the leaders go in this, it's, you know, it's incredible to have super employees. It's always great to have that. But it's more important to give them a voice, because there's not just a specific way of thinking of things. You know, there's multiple aspects, and the culture needs to be set. It's okay to disagree, that there's not going to be some punishment like what's your name, and, you know, maybe you ought to be anonymous, and you don't wear a name tag so nobody knows who you are. But it's one of those things of, you know, you know, it's okay to disagree, and that's important, because nobody wants to bring their boss bad news. Nobody wants to say, I'm the bearer of bad news. But at the end of the day, it's what is needed is the good, the bad, and the ugly. All that needs to come out. Hiding that is going to make things worse. So, you know, it's important to hear what employees have to say, because the higher you get in an organization, the less of an expert you become. So, you know, I kind of look at you know, we've done all these hierarchies in leadership and management and teaching, and here it is, the pyramid of leadership. I've always looked at it as that pyramid needs to be inverted, because the employees don't work for the executive at the top. He or she should work for those people and listen to those people.
Servant leadership model.
Exactly. And, you know, it's one of those things, but at the end of the day, when a decision is made, everybody has to dance to that same sheet of music. You've given the opportunity, you've been able to give your opinions, but then a decision needs to be made, and that at that point needs to
execute. Right.
But however, even though that decision is made, it's important for the person making that decision explains to the populace at large why the decision was made, whether, you know, because they're obviously exposed to other elements those people aren't. It could be the politics, it could be budget driven, it could be all kinds of things, and it may mean that you as a leader don't agree with it, but you have to follow it. But it's important that everybody else understands
that.
And that's a crucial point, I think, of having a very successful organization that's moved forward and allows people to think. I remember, as you brought up, standing up the facility,
Yeah, the day off, yes.
facilities. We were in that transition room, we were sitting on little tile floors before all the labs.
I remember it. It was bare concrete and chain link fence for walls.
Yeah, there you have it.
You know, we had 150-foot power cords and picnic tables.
But it worked. It worked
good.
Good.
Right. We made it work.
And I remember there was a time, I don't remember specifically what it was, but we were having a technical issue, engineering related, but it had to do with the facility, not the aircraft that were there. And, as engineers love to overanalyze and beat things to death to come up with that QED, that final answer. What came out to be the best and the brightest answer and the simplest solution came from the janitor who was in the room, and she oversaw that. She was the lead of them, and she says, "Well, what about this? Have you thought about that?" And it was like,
wow,
that was just so simple. It was just like, wow. So again, it's that diversity issue of being able to let and listen to people's inputs and give them an opportunity, because they all bring in a different view from their perspective on where their background is. And she gave us the answer we were looking for, that we'd been beaten on for weeks, and she came up with the answer. So,
well,
yeah,
I want to stay with that and another couple concepts you mentioned. You mentioned systems of systems thinking. It reminded me a little bit of General McChrystal's team of teams concept, but more applied to kind of the cognitive aspects and the system of systems. But you also, before, you give it a really rich conversation, and thank you for that. You brought up the concepts of, we have to develop enduring infrastructure, but also enduring skill sets. So I wanted to ask you to comment perhaps on the how we need to, as a nation, pivot from perhaps where we've been, with very focused on university education, a lower focus on what people used to call vocational or trade educations, and the systems of systems, right? It's an old joke. I mean, nobody thinks about IT. Nobody thinks about the janitor or building maintenance until something breaks, and then suddenly it's the biggest deal in the world. And so, to my way of thinking, these people are the grease in the gears of the engine. They may not be the engine, but they're the grease that make sure that all these components keep moving in line with each other, in a smooth fashion. But the concept of that, combined with the system of systems, and also the concept of enduring skill sets, which is a phrase, thank you for that one, I haven't heard before. Stated that way, can you talk about what we need as a nation to do moving forward to have the systems of systems thinking, to have the enduring skill sets, and to keep the grease on the gears?
Yeah, that can be a very long, drawn-out discussion, but it's something that nobody like you say, nobody likes to hear bad news. They want to hear everything's rosy, everything's patting along, but you need to understand what things aren't working so that you don't get caught in a bad situation. But into creating this talent and leadership workforce of tomorrow, it's one of those things of education has obviously been a crucial role in our economic and social development as a society as we've grown, from the programs to what we have now. But again, some of the expertise, I think, is starting to go away, and it's, as you brought up, some of the technical skills of the grease. You're not seeing as many carpenters and plumbers and people who kind of help keep this going. Like you say, they're not the engine, but they're the ones that keep it going. That seems to have slowly been eroding, and the focus has all been at the higher end. But, but again, several decades, no one could have predicted the skills that we needed to drive this current economy. And the familiarity with this rapid transforming technology and the tools and the rise of hardcore quantitative skills and a rapid blurring line between hard and soft skills were unpredictable a few
Right.
decades ago. So the next generation of needs kind of talent champions, if you will.
Talent champions. That's an interesting phrase. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, it's leaders. It would be the leaders who would understand the looming skills crisis that we kind of seem to go on, because things change more rapidly than they did during the industrial age. You know, it takes years. This takes like months now, and we're doing something about it. But much of the skill gap related worry is focused on the role of the emerging technologies that are coming in years. So I looked up one thing, and it was interesting. Is there was this one survey they did that 44% of the executives surveyed said their employees had a lack of technological fluency, which is interesting, which is preparing the workforce for the short-term ways in which work is changing. So it's not like in the old day, what you might have gone to work for, let's say, an automobile manufacturer, and you might
Right.
work for them until you retire. Well,
Right.
now it's like you work for somebody, and the next year you work for somebody else, and the
Right.
next year before, you know, they were looking at. I remember resumes of how long, so you had longevity. So how can we trust you? And now it's like things
It's
have
more
changed.
close to the gig economy. So what do you think are some concrete things, especially related to aero and space, that we might be doing to secure that talent supply chain, as it were? I mean, talent champions. That's an interesting point. You know, but what else do you see we need? Whether it's in education, or whether it's in policy, or whether it's in the organizations themselves. I mean, I think all of them have a different role to play.
Well, you know, a short answer to that is yes, or yes, yes, and yes.
Yes, yes, and yes, yeah.
It's the educational and academic system, in my opinion, needs a major overhaul. Okay, which in itself is a complex challenge, but our education system doesn't seem to have kept up with the pace of times. Okay, so our jobs and our economy demand higher skills, and those who don't have them are regulated at on average to a lifetime of lower earnings and less job security. So, you know, going to the education, everything starts at education. Obviously, I was able to succeed where I was because of the education I received, and not just necessarily the bits and pieces, but the professors and teachers who gave it to you, and who also saw some promise and maybe some potential you might have had, that encouraged you along the way, as opposed to saying, why are you here and you're not good enough. But the education still, our current education still runs on the industrial factory model. Okay? It's moving students along in the same age group with the same fixed blocks of times, and you're taking the classes. The classes are stovepipe. Most of the students are expected to learn from the same material in the same way at the same pace. So it's a meat grinder. And, you know, and the large schools still function implicitly as a sorting system. You know, that was great in the 50s when we were in that, and you stovepipe things. So then, you know, many of the students exited the system before or during or just after high school with good prospects of finding a well-paying job in a skilled tradesman or manufacturing job, where a smaller number went on to acquire degrees. So, you know, there's, you know, it needs to have a different focus. And I read an IG report, in the way I interpreted it. It may have not been what they had perceived, but that's how I got out of it. Was the number of engineers or STEM type people that are being graduated out of China and these other countries that we call competitors is the number. But it's like, are we interested in the quantity of graduates or the
Or the
quality?
quality, right?
I'm interested in quality, not you know, I don't need millions of engineers running around, and you know, some of them really don't have the aptitude to be able to do it, but they were pushed through. So, you know, our education needs to help the children to develop into an autonomous, independent thinking individual, that's related to empathetically around, the people around the world. Because the world, I remember when I was in grade school, they said, well, the world's going to get smaller and smaller. And I'm going, well, how's that going to happen? You got airplanes now, you got boats, and how's it going to be? Well, things are instantaneous now.
Right. No, nobody had a thought about the internet at that time.
No.
And we'd be able to, you sitting in Prescott, Arizona, me sitting in Walnut Creek, California, be able to be having this discussion live in real time.
As opposed to writing a letter.
Right. That was Jules Verne sci-fi, right, at the time. And now we're living it.
Exactly. And so it's one of the things where, I have had the privilege of going to a couple of academies, which I thought that their teaching was right on the mark. So they might have somebody who's very interested, let's say, in engineering. So the focus of the course is engineering, but in that they interweave what the rest of us find out after we graduate. And in my case in engineering, that what do you mean I have to deal with finance, or I have to deal with human resources, or I have to deal with, I didn't go to school to do all that stuff.
Right.
But what they did is they took like an engineering course and they interwove history, finance, public affairs, these are the things that you're going to have to do. And they also learned the history of the element that they're working on. And so it could have been Laplace, or it could have been, whoever it was. But in their project, they're tying all of these elements together. So they're getting elements of history. They're getting elements of human resources and management, and it's getting funneled into what they're doing. They don't have to take a class on history to where they're memorizing names, dates, and places, and they have no interest in that, but they learn them and memorize them long enough to pass the test and move on. And if they ever need to see it, that's the way that you did it in the past. You had encyclopedias. Today, I can do a Google search and get unlimited resources on what I need to know. So I don't need to have that
instant recall of those things.
Exactly.
But it's more about how can you access information. So, sir, we're getting into the bottom quarter of the hour. So I want to also, ask your advice. Because as part of the America's Future series, right, we focus on what America and its allies can do to maintain leadership in the world, and right now is an interesting time in terms of partnerships as well. For example, the program that I've been part of now for a decade, Sophia, is 20% German. The ISS, very famously, is the International Space Station, even though there's always been American leadership. And now in the kind of modern commercial space race, the number 3 company, perhaps the number 2, really depends on who you ask, Rocket Lab, is from New Zealand, little New Zealand, down near the bottom of the earth, where they have sheep and penguins and some of the most beautiful scenery in the world. But I don't think 10 years ago anybody, if you had told somebody that we were going to have in the top 3 launch companies right now, one of them is going to be from New Zealand, people would have said, "Are you kidding me?" And yet that's where we are. So you've seen this. You've helped create international partnerships. You've helped review relationships and look for opportunities. Where do you see the opportunities for America and its allies moving forward to create this space economy together?
Yeah, I think that's brilliant. I think the moving from completely government-run and controlled space-related type activities, moving it on to commercial, in my opinion, is decades overdue. And it's one of those things, like I said, the analogy would be, can you imagine what would be if the government was still running the airline business?
Right, that's not a good idea.
It's not good. It's not good for anybody involved. It's not, like for NASA, for example, is an R&D organization that supports the country because individuals and smaller and companies at large, except for a few, can't afford to have their stockholders be upset with them about putting money in R&D that doesn't produce profit. So, as we're going along with these government launch initiatives, we need to, they've already put some into place, the regulations, the tax, the research and development to create an environment for the space companies. But the government needs to get away from this arrogance that we've done it, we're the only ones that do it, we're the only ones that know how to do it. But that was not part of your charter. Your charter is to develop these technologies and then pass it on, which is stated in Section 203 of the 1950s.
Right. The American taxpayer has paid for it, put it in the industry. Let's create jobs. Let's create commerce. Let's make it part of the people's daily lives.
Exactly.
Move on to the next thing, perhaps, right?
Move on to the next technology that's going to help this country grow, not build a space bus business, if you will. And some of it's already taken place, that obviously the last, just a couple days ago was another launch.
That's right.
SpaceX to the ISS. I think that's just absolutely fabulous. It's outstanding that there's this opportunity with this. But also we have a myriad of disruptive forces circling it kind of, again, this is part of that system of systems in the banking and financial sectors. The business of space is one of the future economic engines, I believe, of development and prosperity that, you can tap into that. But also understanding that space is a high-risk business. But, aircraft in this initial stage were very high risk too, and it's become more and more reliable as times go on. But many of the startups in this industry are yet to develop a viable business model. Okay, some of them have, and they're still developing it, and they're plowing new ground. So there's nobody to tell them how to do it or what to do. So they can figure it out as they go. And a lot of the investments are irrespective, of what goes on. But it's not that this sector is clearly not without risk. That risk needs to be embraced as an integral part of their strategy to maintain future prosperity.
Right.
You can't say, "Oh, I had this, oops," and stop. And I have a different definition of failure. Failure is an absence or a loss of something. The classical definition. But I look at it if you are on a path of trying to discover something with a technology and you have an intended output, and that intended output is in the other direction, where it didn't give you what you wanted and it didn't provide what you were hoping for. I look at that as a learning exercise. If you learn from it, that helps you proceed forward at that point, then that at that particular time then is a learning thing. It's not a failure, it's a success. Now, if you go along the same element and repeat the same mistake twice because you didn't learn from the first, to me, that's a failure because you didn't learn. So I haven't come up with a word. I don't know, maybe I just grab a handful of Scrabble chips and throw them on the ground and see how they come out and make up a word for it. I don't know.
Well, I mean, it's really an interesting concept because what it sounds like you're advocating, and parts of the government have already embraced this, is the agile management mindset. And it sounds like that's what you're, the famous, and I think it was just in the movie. I think when interviewed, Gene Kranz said he never actually said it. The famous phrase, failure is not an option.
Right.
That was an excellent writer rather than, but certainly Kranz titled his subsequent book that, which is pretty cool. But I think what I'm hearing is that failure is an option. In fact, failure may be a good option if you can do it in a managed, safe way, and learn a lot from it, which is the agile ethos. So we're coming to the bottom of the hour, sir, and I want to give you an opportunity to kind of share with us any specific takeaways you would like to leave about how to manage these aerospace programs, because as you point out, a lot of these business models are half-baked. That's fine. This is how it works, right? is that these ideas don't spring forth fully formed from as Athena from Zeus's mind, right? No, they're iterative, and they're created over time, and there is trial and error. So how would how would you move forward, or what are some key takeaways, briefly, that you would give to people to help them manage programs, help them manage their research centers, help them get us to the moon, to Mars, and beyond with the capabilities?
Yeah, it'd be nice if there was one silver bullet that you could uh, come up with that would answer everybody's question.
Maybe a six gun.
Yeah, it might even be more than that. You might have to have a big clip in there, but there's it. Really kind of starts down in my opinion in the education part of it. But the problem is people overlook that education element, especially if it's young and upcoming, because the investment is a long-term investment. It's not where you throw money in and you get an answer the next day or next year.
Right.
It may be 20, 25 years later before you see a result of that investment. But it's what we don't need, and the COVID hasn't helped either, is along with the education. It may have helped in some respects, but there's an element of education that I think is missing, and that's how do you socialize? How do you interact with people? It's just on a regular basis. There's microcosms of it when you have a project and you work with a team. It gives you a little bit of that, but I don't think there's a correlation between working in a team and having team members that don't produce, and then at the end you're the one that gets beat up because you didn't produce what you were going to do. But I think it begins with the education. It moves up with the financial, and the financial part of it, where I think there's kind of a four-faceted type of thing, or five, if you will, is having the right strategy, and working with a leadership to innovate an explicit part of the corporate strategy of taking this on.
So not just a strategy for innovation, but an innovative strategy.
Innovative, exactly. That's exactly what it is. And you can't do it based on the way we used to do it, because things are changing faster than we seem to keep in pace with it, i.e. the education element. We need to keep that evolving just as quick. So you can imagine if Henry Ford still made airplanes the same way, or cars the same way that he did back in the early 1900s. But there's also, having a portfolio to create space for new innovations within the portfolios of the products and services, because it's easy for leaders to invest in the incremental improvements to current products, but that transformational innovation where the companies make new products for the markets is much more difficult to accomplish. And I think that's where the government can help out. And that's why the taxpayer pays us, the government, is to develop these potential technologies that have promise to develop them to a point where we can pass them on and help other industry like SpaceX or Blue Origin or all the other ones to help them. That's what we're supposed to do. We're not supposed to take it on. We're supposed to develop and pass it on. And so the other one, is a clear strategy for innovation is leaders can fail to protect their investments in the innovation from budget cuts within the core business, but these tentacles are often or sometimes cut off when they reach the innovation lab. So, without a protected budget, so there needs to be a budget. It doesn't matter if it's company or government. It needs to be fenced off that it's not touched. Right. So you have to succeed in that long term to create that financial space by protecting these investments. And just because it didn't give you the answer that you wanted, it may have been a learning to move in another direction, right. Or there might be another technology that can learn from it as well. But your management also needs you need these contemporary entrepreneurs that use use lean startup methods.
Right, right. So the entrepreneurship model.
Yeah, involve experimentation and an iterative product development, not do this, and next week you got an answer. So, you know, we can't be using the same processes and tools that we've been using to manage our company's core products that we've been doing, but to create a management space for innovation. And that's using a different set of tools and managing the early stage of product development. And those tools should help these leaders ask the right questions and what to do next. And then there's the time element. You know, is it possible to sustain the innovation within the small shards that you have of free time that we have within the jobs that we work from day to day? So I can see where a lot of entrepreneurs are frustrated by the limited amount of time they have to work on new ideas, because somebody wants an answer, because it's all bailing down to where's the money, where is it, what's it coming, how's it made. So if you look, a lot of things are all rolled around the money aspect. So, you know, so you need a lot, the time to protect that focus on these new elements. So, you know, so it's kind of a five-faceted. Is it complete? No, but I think from a top level, perhaps.
No, but thank you. Thank you for that. And then thank you for your time today. You know, we're super grateful to have you on. You know, we touched on a lot of amazing things, some new specific concepts to think about, from systems of systems thinking to using destinations as measuring sticks. You know, to the concept of enduring infrastructure, enduring skill sets, and really driving agility into aerospace management, which, right, being one of the most risk-averse industries in the world, agility is challenging for our program. So, you know, thank you for that. To hear it from someone who's seen so much, done so much, really gives a weight to that concept that it may be lacking in other places. You know, thank you again so much for joining us today. Thank you to our sponsors, and you know, we ask that people like and subscribe to our channel and join us for upcoming interviews with professionals. And I think we're going to have Director Schmidt as part of our 2021 Space Innovation Symposium. So you'll get to hear more from him then. Thank you, sir. Again.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me as part of America's Future Series. I enjoy it, and I'm looking forward to continuing.
All right. Take care, folks. Bye.